Ladies and gentlemen, my southern kinsmen, distinguished guests, please allow me to introduce you to the 2016 Annual Florida League of the South State Conference. All of you here, we don't have any guests that I don't know, so you know who I am. But I'd like to thank each and every one of you for being here today. The League of the South reveres the tenets of its historic Christian faith, and it is in the custom of asking our Lord's blessing upon everything we do. So with that in mind, I'd like to ask Pastor Tom Davis to come up here on our meeting today.
Let's pray together. Holy God, we come before you in the name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Loving thee, Lord, because you first loved us, had mercy and grace upon our souls. Father, we thank you for this cause, the men and women who have gathered here to what we believe is your cause. We ask your blessings upon this day, Father. Bless those that are here gathered to fellowship. Bless those that are here to speak. Bless our whole movement, Father, that it would have that distinct feel that the hand of God is upon us and upon our cause. We pray in the name of Christ alone. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, sir. This conference is being video recorded for future use. It's also being live streamed to interested parties around the world, mostly Western and Eastern Europe today. So I must ask you, as a courtesy to our speakers and our camera operators, that you turn off your cell phones at this time, and let's keep the comments down to a low level. I'd like to ask, has everybody signed in at the front desk there? And has everybody got your raffle ticket? Anybody not have a raffle ticket? Okay, it seems that our folks at the door were ruthlessly efficient today. We have 3 speakers lined up for you today, and unfortunately we have some sharp time constraints. So rather than spending a lot of time telling those of you who are not league members about the history, goals, core beliefs, and strategy of the League of the South, information packet that you can read later at your own leisure. Included in the packet is contact information for the Florida League of the South and national headquarters. It has links to websites and our Facebook pages where you can gather more information. For those of you who have not already familiarized yourself with the League of the South, we're not your typical Tea Party, Constitution Party, or other right-wing patriotic group. We're something completely different, and you might be in for a wild ride here today. Brace yourselves for that ride. Our 3 speakers will be covering 3 interrelated topics, and they include why we are not free, how to start being free, and why the League of the South offers the only sane solution to make you free. If you will refer to your program agendas, which are supposed to be separate from your packets there, you'll see that today's conference consists of 2 parts. Part 1 began at 10:30 a.m. with registration and will last until 1:35 p.m. And this will be of general interest to members and non-members alike. We're going to have a dinner break from 1:35 to 3 p.m. Those interested in gathering for that meal, time enough to travel to the restaurant, order the meal, get served, relax, have some conversation, and get back in time for our second part of the conference, which is our business meeting. We also planned that a little bit late so we can avoid the lunch crowd, the place we're planning on going today. In the interest of time, if you have any questions for any of our 3 speakers today, I would suggest that you hold them until the dinner break and go with us to dinner and talk across the table to our speakers about anything you may wish to discuss. As I said, the second part of today's meeting is a business meeting from 3 to 5 p.m. and we expect only actual league members to be present during that time period. I think that pretty much covers everybody in this room with their non-league member guests. The theme of today's conference is the futility of reform, and sums up the league's position of opposition to the nonsensical efforts by American patriots to continually play by the rules of a rigged political system stacked against us. A system that is, despite our best efforts at voting and flag waving, continue to drag us down further to socialism, economic poverty, and moral decay with every election. With this in mind, I would like to introduce our first speaker. Mr. Mark Tomey is a native of Marlton, Arkansas, where he graduated from high school in 1978. He attended the University of Arkansas, obtaining a BS in civil engineering in 1983. He spent the next 13 years gaining experience and making business contacts, which allowed him to establish his own consulting firm, Structural Engineering, in 1996. He has since been enjoying both the headaches and rewards of owning his own business. His firm serves clients in the architectural, metal building systems, pulp and paper, chemical and plastics manufacturing, and wood products industries. Mark has been a member of the League since 1996, and he currently serves on the League's board of directors. He has also been a part of the Southern National Congress since its inception in 2007, where he is currently serving as Vice Chairman of the Congress and Chairman of the SNC Constitution Committee. Marguerite live near Blitzville, Alabama, are the proud owners of a 21-acre farm, which they named Terrebonne, in honor of their French ancestry and the Louisiana parish where Marguerite was born. They have 3 sons, 3 granddaughters, 1 grandson, and are awaiting the arrival of their 4th granddaughter in September. Ladies and gentlemen, we introduce Mr. Mark Tomey.
Thank you, Mike, for that nice introduction. Thank you also for the kind invitation to be here today to speak to the Florida League of the South. It's always a pleasure and a privilege to be asked to come down here and spend time with my Southern nationalist compatriots from the great Republic of Florida. The title of my talk today is The American Union, the Scourge of the South. And I'd like to start off with a quotation. Quote, "And whatever the Yankee myth actually is, it is actual evil. Real evil visited upon real people in the past and in the present. Its origins lie within the Puritans of New England, whose already twisted theology led to a way of life and a set of ideas by the Puritans' bastard child, the Yankee. The latter, having dictated what it means to be an American, forced his own torturous theology on succeeding generations by violence wherever and whenever necessary." Now, those are a few of the words from the introduction of a friend of mine named McDonald King Aston's book called Yankee Babylon. And I think that they set the stage quite well for my remarks to you today about how and why the American Union has been and still is the scourge of the South. Us in the Southern Nationalist movement, who studied the cultural, social, and political history of our people in North America, it is no stretch of logic by any means to assert that the Yankee myth, this Yankee Babylon, spoken of so eloquently by Mr. Aston, is synonymous with the American Union. Study of history, coupled with observation of our contemporary situation within the American Union, further demonstrates that from the get-go, it was, and it still is, a bad deal for the South. Indeed, it more than qualifies as a scourge because it has been a thing that has caused great suffering and trouble for the South. So the question becomes, why would we have joined you in the first place? Well, to paraphrase a snappy comment that I've heard, there are advantages in union, but they usually go to the wrong people. Now, for the Southern people, this has proved particularly true. the seminal event of American history is our attempt to withdraw from that union 155 years ago because its advantages went to the wrong people and because they were perverted and are still perverted to our injury and oppression. But before we get too far down the road, let me digress just a little bit, and let's take some time to explore the very idea of the union and see if we can identify and shed some light upon some of our ancestors' errors in this regard. Now, union is a natural result of the created nature of man to be a social creature. And we see the manifestations of this natural tendency in our personal, social, economic, and political associations. At the level, men and women join together in the holy bond of matrimony for the purposes of producing children for the glory of God, for companionship, and to help save one another's souls. Socially, we form various clubs and groups and organizations in order to participate in leisure activities and for the entertainment and education and assistance of those who belong to those groups. Economically, there are organizations such as trade unions, which are designed to protect and advance the particular interests of those who are members of the organization. Politically, we form nations, and we create governments for those nations. And then from time to time, those nations form alliances with other nations to pursue various objectives. Now, the other important aspect of union that we need to consider is that the parties who are involved must have a reasonable expectation or assurance that the terms of union will bring them greater benefits than detriments, that the obligations of all the parties involved will be faithfully discharged, and that their rights will be respected and protected. It is completely counterintuitive, even suicidal, to think that we would enter into such arrangements in order to bring misery upon ourselves. Now, of course, men being what they are, the possibility of corruption and abuse has to be accounted for, and a means of redress or escape should be provided, because who in his right mind willingly stays in an abusive and dangerous relationship? Who enjoys being in a situation where they are used, ridiculed, physically attacked, politically disenfranchised, and legally discriminated against? What kind of mentally deranged person sticks with an arrangement like that simply because their tormentor tells them that it's the greatest thing ever, and that they would be a fool to ever want to break away from such a sacred bond? I wonder what kind of people might do that. Maybe some of them are in this room. Now, these things briefly explain the reasons why we join together in union, but the next logical is, what are the prerequisites for forming a strong, beneficial, and long-lasting union? Well, in a word, the answer is compatibility. Now, some of you may be looking at me and saying, compatibility, is that all you got? But think of the multitudinous areas of compatibility that we have to consider in any of these choices for union, whether it's marriage, whether it's joining a trade union, or some kind of civic organization, or a political union. We have to consider religion, race, culture, the various talents of the parties involved, their aspirations for the future, their character, background, common interests, political worldview, and on and on and on. These categories are many. They are intertwined and complicated, and it is vitally important that they be considered very, very carefully. You know, when I got ready to be married, what were the things that I looked for in a wife? I wanted a girl that was Catholic, who was white, who was Southern, who grew up in a family background similar to mine, who had the same kind of goals and aspirations for the future, having children, you know, and those kind of things. You know, I knew it would be foolish of me to go out and settle down with a black Jewish feminist who belonged to the new Black Panther Party and think, oh, love conquers all, it'll work out fine. That would be ridiculous. When I was in college studying engineering, one of the courses that we had to take was called Engineering Economics. And one of the concepts that they taught us was called conducting a benefit cost ratio analysis. And the way that you go about doing this is that if you are considering doing something, in this case pursuing some particular engineering project, what you do is you sit down and you make a dispassionate, objective analysis of the benefits of doing this project, monetary value to it. So, for example, if the Big Beaver, also known as the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, wants to build a new lake somewhere, you know, they will sit down and they'll say, well, on the benefit side, it's going to create all these opportunities for recreation for people. They'll be able to come to the lake and fish and ski and swim and so forth. And, you know, people will build businesses along the shores of the lake to service people who are coming to the lake for that. And so they assign value to that and so forth. And then when you go to the cost side, well, what's it going to cost us to do this? Well, we've got to go in and steal everybody's land who lives in the area where we're going to dam up the river. You know, of course, eminent domain, we'll compensate them for their property. But all you got to do is talk to a few people who've ever had that happen to them and find out what kind of fair and just compensation they get. You know, what's it going to take to mobilize the construction crews, and what's it going to cost to haul in dirt and build the dam and all this other kind of stuff. And at the end of all of this, you have a total on both sides of the balance sheet: the cost of the benefits, the cost of, and then the value of the cost. If the benefits outweigh the cost, then the conclusion is, okay, this is a viable project, all things considered, and we should move forward with it. If the costs outweigh the benefits, then you're supposed to say, well, maybe let's try something else. This is not a good option to pursue. So with this in mind, our question devolves to this: are the South and her people compatible with the American Union? And if they're not, the question is, why in the hell are we still part of it? Now, my premise is that we are completely incompatible with the Union, and that we should sever our connection with it once and for all. Yes, you heard it here first, folks. Secession and independence. So now let me present my argument in favor of this bold, viable, and sane solution to the detrimental and abusive position that we currently occupy within the American Union. Let's look at a little historical background first. From the beginning, it was widely recognized by the most astute observers, both North and South, that their peoples were quite dissimilar, and that those differences were not due just to their new positions in North America, but could be traced back hundreds of years to their positions in Europe. The various peoples who primarily populated the South were from cultures with deep agrarian traditions, strong ties to kith and kin, familiarity with tragedy and poverty, fierce independence, stubborn self-sufficiency, and a deeply rooted distrust for strong centralized governmental power. Now, by contrast, those European peoples who primarily populated the northern section of North America during the colonial period were from cultures that emphasized mercantilism, the seafaring trades, manufacturing, and money and banking. Kith and kin took a back seat to profit and worldly advancement. More accustomed to ease and comfort, and because of the nature of their primary worldly pursuits, for a strong, active, centralized government that could provide subsidies to and protections from competition for their various business interests. Now, many years later, the great Southern philosopher Richard Weaver would succinctly and eloquently describe these differences between these two groups as what he called classical man and Faustian man. The Southerner, according to Weaver, is a classical man in that he is acquainted with tragedy and understands that there must be fixed limits in all things. He knows that some things will forever be beyond his comprehension, but he has reached an accommodation with nature to lead the good life, and he shuns ceaseless becoming for simple, statuesque becomeness. He also recognizes the irremediability of a certain amount of evil in the world, and he's content to fence it in rather than stomp on it and spread it everywhere. Now, the Yankee, according to Weaver, is a Faustian man, meaning that he is a restless striver, a yearner after the infinite, someone who is unhappy unless he feels he is making the world over. He's haunted by the thought that somewhere someone might be happy. He talks much of tolerance, but for other ideas and ways of life he has not respect, but contemptuous indifference or virulent hatred until such time as those other ways can be brought into conformance with his own. He at once thrusts his victim into what the authors of I'll Take My Stand call the infinite series. And he can never, ever consent to leave them in peace. Now, it is true that they made North and South join together and made common cause with one another for independence from Great Britain. But beyond that, they were as different as daylight and dark, and were quite suspicious of one another. When the new plan of union, which was to replace their pre-existing loose confederation, was being debated in the conventions of the several states, it was the wise and prophetic Patrick Henry of Virginia who said that his objections were not so much to the form of government that was being debated, and his objections to it were many and formidable, as it was to those with whom the South would be partnered under it. He understood the incompatibility of two diametrical civilizations being joined together under a governmental structure that would, sooner or later, be expropriated by one party and perverted and used to exploit and enslave the other. He could see down the road to Fort Sumter. So what's the result of our historical analysis, our historical benefit cost ratio analysis of our ancestors' moves to join the American Union? Well, I believe they erred in three key areas. Number one, they naively misjudged the character of the Yankee, or thought that he might actually be reformable. They failed to insist upon an adequate fleshing out and defining of limited versus reserved powers, and for providing an express means of checking and or redressing abuses of power. For example, nullification and secession. Now, all this sums up to that they badly miscalculated the value of the benefits versus the cost of union and the ultimate triumph of what John C. Calhoun called key numbers. Within the American Union, then and now, there are more of them than there are of us. Always outvote us. I found it funny here recently. I believe it's Senator Richard Shelby of Alabama is running for re-election this fall. And on one of his radio commercials, he makes the statement, or the narrator makes the statement, Richard Shelby has fought against everything that Obama has tried to do, et cetera, et cetera. And I couldn't help but just start laughing to myself and thinking, yeah, he fought against it. But what was the end result? He lost every stinking time. So what good is it? What good is it to resist when you have no hope of ever being able to outvote these people? Richard Shelby can get up there and fight till he's blue in the face. The rest of these people are always going to have more votes than we do. It is an exercise in futility, my friends. Now the rest, as they say, is history. Tempers flared, words were exchanged, and eventually bullets flew. And the Southern people were dragged back into a contractual condition that they had found completely objectionable by brute force. Now, to borrow the lyrics from one of my favorite Allman Brothers songs, we were tied to the whipping post. Tied to the whipping post. And oh Lord, I feel like I'm dying. And that's where we remain to this day, tied to the whipping post. To even use the term union for the condition that we have been subjected to for the last century and a half is a crime against the English language, unless you put the word Soviet in front of it. Pray tell me, please, the difference between what communist Russia did to most of Eastern Europe and what the United States of America did to the South. And please pray tell me why it is that every Southerner I've ever known instinctively and automatically recognizes the evil and injustice of what the Russians did to Eastern Europe, but praises and celebrates what the United States of America did to us. It's insane. And what of our condition in this mythical American Union today? I mean, let's face it, we've all been steeped in its lore by years of government schooling and media propaganda. We throw its jingoistic phrases around every day in our political discourse. It's the shining city on a hill, the last best hope of mankind, the universal melting pot where the world's huddled masses yearn to breathe free, the greatest system of government ever conceived by the mind of mortal man, the defender of democracy and liberty at home and around the world, dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal, etc., etc. Now it was, according to its founders, established to, quote, form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, unquote. Well, sadly for we Southerners, this has all proved illusory. The reality has fallen far short of the high-toned rhetoric. For us, It is not a shining city on a hill. It is a prison camp that extends from the Piedmont of Virginia to the plains of West Texas and from the Ohio River to the Gulf of Mexico. Despite some modest access to the so-called material prosperity of the Union, Southerners still, all things considered, are among the most impoverished of Americans. We search the courts in vain for any semblance of justice regarding our dearest rights and interests. Where can one find domestic tranquility among the riots, demonstrations, looting, arson, and physical violence that are perpetuated by the victim classes against us? We are not defended because the regime openly allows those who express a virulent hatred for us to come here by the tens of thousands, if not millions, often aiding and abetting them with your tax dollars. Every time we attempt to address a problem, we are thwarted by the glorious Union. Whether it's immigration, sodomy, abortion, gun ownership, voting restrictions, crime and punishment, any one of a host of other issues, you pick your favorite. We are always struck down unilaterally by some black-robed federal judge. The will of the people of the southern states is overturned by the tyranny of one appointed man or woman. It's ridiculous that we subject ourselves to this oppression and nonsense. Just ask yourself, by stepping back for a moment and think about it a little bit, and imagine, ask yourself the question, if the South were a free and self-governing republic, would we even be discussing allowing mentally deranged men who like to dress up as women to use the restroom with our mothers and wives and daughters? Of course not. Would there be one single operating abortion clinic anywhere in the South? Would we round up and deport all of these third world invaders?
Yes.
Would we recriminalize sodomy? Well, the obvious answer is a resounding yes. Of course we would. Any sane Christian civilization would put a stop to this stuff. But you are not allowed to, Mr. and Mrs. Southerner, because you have to be watched and controlled very carefully by your masters in Washington, D.C. As Mac Aston pointed out in the quote that I used to open my speech, it is our enemies who have dictated what it means to be American. And you ain't it. And they will never miss an opportunity, never ever do they miss an opportunity to remind us of just how racist and bigoted and homophobic and xenophobic and backwards and ignorant and otherwise reprehensible that we are. Every TV show, every movie that has a Southern character in it, he's always the toothless, racist redneck who wants to burn down some church or hang some Negro. Every time, without fail. They like to let us know that we are not like them. And my question to you, my fellow Southerners, is when will you respond in kind? Because you will never have their respect. ever. You are the redheaded stepchild. You are the crazy uncle that has to be kept locked away from the rest of the family so that nobody sees him or hears about it. But yet, after untold effusion of Southern blood, fighting their wars for them over the last 150 years, after all of the expropriation of our wealth, for them to pursue objectives that we abhor, we still try to be good Americans. Well, this situation reminds me of a scene from a comedy movie called Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Now, I don't know how many of you have ever seen Ferris Bueller's Day Off, but it's one of those typical teen angst kind of movies. Well, there's a scene where Ferris and his best buddy and his girlfriend are on the shores of Lake Michigan, and his buddy has had a nervous breakdown and is lying there catatonic staring at the sky because they absconded with his dad's Ferrari that he never drove, only rode with a diaper, and they put like 300 miles on it. And so he knew when he got home he was going to be in big trouble. So he's just beside himself. And Ferris is kind of doing this monologue off to the side, talking about his best friend Cameron. And he says, you know, the sad thing about Cameron is that he's never had a girlfriend. And so at some point, when we go off to college next year or the year after, he's finally going to meet a girl who's probably going to be intimate with him. And he's going to marry her. Because in his mind, she will have given him the greatest end-all, be-all thing of all time. And she will treat him like crap. Because you can't respect somebody who kisses your ass. So in closing, my fellow Southerners, I beg you to break the bonds of the whipping post, to stop kissing Yankee ass, and to reclaim what is rightfully yours, a name and place among the nations of the earth. Thank you, and God save the South.
Mark. I want to remind all my Florida friends that Floridians have a long history of resisting the American Empire. Most of us are familiar with our resistance in 1861, but also in 1776, we didn't want to have anything to do with that. Check your packets. I believe we have a flyer in there that's authored by Mark Tommy. We put out a very good article in the Free Magnolia that we turned into a flyer. I believe it's American versus Southerners, or yeah, great article. Let's check that out. Our next speaker, Mr. Tom Davis, is 49 years of age and with his wife Angie has 4 grown children, 5 grandchildren, and counting. He was born and raised and still resides in Bacon County, Georgia, which is located in southeast Georgia. He has been a member of the League of the South for over 20 years. Tom runs a family retail flooring company and is an ordained Baptist minister. He received a bachelor's degree from the Humanities Department of Bruton Parker College in 1988, but considers his real education to have taken place in the company of good men and the good books they gave to him. Tom has authored a political thriller titled Georgia Burns, as well as co-authoring the fantasy novel with his son Haley titled Sight. And I have copies of those books here today, and I want to tell you they're both romping good reads, and they're both in their own ways. And I highly suggest reading them. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Tom Davis.
Well, amen. I want to thank you for having me today. I am a last minute fill-in, so don't expect too much. I was looking forward to hearing Mr. Harry Beadle, Don't know a whole lot about Harry, but I just thought his name was real cool. Harry Beagle, that's a cool name. But we'll get him maybe again sometime. And of course, Mark, I've called him Tomei, Mark Tommy. Just always thrilled to hear him. Can't wait to hear the big chief, Mike Hill, as well. Now, I have a prop that I must retrieve. You'll bear with me. This past week, a big wind blew through South Georgia and blew through my yard and took down a limb about this big out of one of my ancient oak trees. I had to retrieve this. I went to work on that limb, and I came back in after a time of chopping wood, and I told my wife, I said, God has spoken to me. He was in the wind. He's given me a prop for my speech to the Florida League of the South. And this is it. I'll explain it a little bit later as we go on about the things that we've got to cut off and to cut out. But I want to retrieve my prop. Again, let me say good morning and greetings from the sovereign state of Georgia, which has forgotten she is sovereign, but will remember it before the end, we trust and pray. I am Tom Davis. I've been a member of the League of the South since the time that it was called the Southern League. How many of you remember that it was called the Southern League one time? A few hands go up. I'm giving away my age here, Dr. Hewitt, a little bit. The Southern League, a name which drew inspiration from our European counterpart, the Lega Nord, the Northern League, fellow travelers on the road to independence. I believe that's in northern Italy. Am I correct? But for prudent legal reasons, we became the League of the South. I want to talk just a little while about my journey from what I call Ameriolatry, or an allegiance to America, journeying from that position to the position of a Southern nationalist. As a pastor and minister, I've worked with many people through their conversion to Christ. And regardless of what many of the false theologians say, everyone's conversion to Christ is not the same. For some, it's like a tornado just blows through their life, and it's a radical change in a short period of time. For others, it's just a small, sweet breeze just blows through, like for years, and their conversion takes place over a course of years. Well, in converting to a Southern nationalist position, there are also many journeys, in many ways, that people come to the knowledge of the truth. I first heard about the League of the South in the pages of the Southern Partisan magazine. It was published out of South Carolina. Dr. Michael Hill had been interviewed, and as I recall, the editors of the Southern Partisan magazine counseled, it was their advice not to begin a modern secession movement. Yet they were kind enough to grant Dr. Hill some space in their pages of their magazine. Well, I've noticed that the Southern Partisan magazine is long defunct, but Mike Hill and the League of the South are growing stronger than ever. For that we are grateful. My friends, if you are this day a Southern nationalist, then give thanks to Holy God that you have been converted and delivered from the darkness of Ameriolatry, from misdirected patriotism, and from the Stockholm Syndrome writ large. For me, it was more of an instinct at first to join the League. I mean, it was more just an inner voice, something in my blood. When I read Dr. Hill's interview there in the pages of that magazine, I said, well, this looks like something I've got to be a part of. So it wasn't long before I had contacted Dr. Hill and became a member. But I want to state this as succinctly as I can. to illustrate my journey. I joined, and then over the course of years, I became a Southern Nationalist. Instinctively, from my blood, I joined. I said, these are my people. These are my blood. These are the people I want to be a part of. But I did not understand the facets of Southern Nationalists. I had to come to that. And so that was a journey of years. And hey, I'm still on the journey. I'm still learning more every day. As I said in the introduction that Mike Tubbs read, it's been a journey of years for me, and it is a story of conversion and of becoming in the company of good men and the books that they have fed to me, that I am becoming a Southern Nationalist more and more as I grow. So I want to make that point. I want to speak briefly this morning, of course, on the title of Achieving Independence Within one's own heart and mind. We've all heard about winning the hearts and minds of the people. Well, it's not an easy thing to do. It is necessary work. You even have to work at winning your own heart and mind, converting your own soul by the grace of God to Southern nationalism. We are rightfully concerned with winning the allegiance of our own people back from a foreign invader, the American Empire. What a challenge that is for us. Winning our own people back to us and to our own cause, which is their cause, all they don't know it. It can be compared to attempting to drag an obstinate Brahmin bull back into a green pasture when he doesn't want to go into the green pasture. He doesn't know that it is in his own best interest to go back into the green pasture. But Southern nationalism, rightly understood and accepted, gives us a great hope for the future. Since I become a grandfather, man, I didn't know what it was like to be a grandfather. Everybody had been telling me, oh, it's just going to change your life. It's so great. But you can never experience it until you have those grandchildren. It's changed me even more profoundly, because I think more and more every day about the future, their future. I want a future for my grandchildren. I love my children. I want a future for them. But I'm even more intensely focused on my grandbabies now. I want to build something for them. I don't want to give up on their future. Every time we see someone with a Confederate battle flag on their pickup truck or flying over their home, we have or at least I have a kind of a thrill of hope within me. I think now there's a potential convert. But just as often as not, on the other side of the pickup truck or at the top of the flagpole flies the federal flag of the empire. Now, you and I know that this is cognitive dissonance, the Stockholm Syndrome, a surrender to white guilt and self-loathing. But the ones flying these contradictory standards don't understand that. Listen, they believe it's the very essence of patriotism to fly those flags. That's what they sincerely believe. We've got to try to convince them of otherwise. It's as if they're saying, look at me, I can be a good Southerner and a good American at the same time. Well, my friend, no, you can't. No man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. But the instinct to be true to one's people is in their blood, but they have been misled on how to live that out. And so that is the kernel of truth that I want to try to dig out this morning, because when a person comes to realize they must ditch the American empire and embrace their own nation, people, and identity, that is the moment they have achieved what I will call inner independence. Independence within the own heart and mind. And that is the first kind and the most important kind. At that moment, they can say, I've freed myself of the chains of racial guilt, of historical offense, of eternal repentance for being born a white Southerner, I'm free now of the Stockholm Syndrome, of identifying with my captors. I'm free of the clamp that has been on my brain since childhood. When I was taught to never be proud of your own people, never be proud of their magnificent accomplishments, never be proud of their exquisite culture and manners. And the fact that our people settled these wild lands and took dominion over it, drove out the savages, and built a Christian civilization out of nothing. Free at last. Free at last. We are the people that can truly say that when we have become Southern nationalists. The Bible says, let every man be persuaded in his own mind. When God turns your heart back to your own people, it is a truly amazing conversion. When the scales fall from your eyes and you see the American empire for what it is, the abortion-loving, queer marriage legalizing, transvestite defending, Christ-hating empire, that is when you will remember where you are from and who you are from. And don't tell me that it doesn't matter where a person's allegiance lies and what your political convictions are. It means everything. It means everything. What did von Clausewitz say about war? War is just politics by other means. Well, turn that phrase around. What is politics then? It is just low-level warfare. That's all it is. Nothing more, nothing less. It matters where you stand politically. It means the difference in standing for the survival of your very kith and kin, your folk and your faith, or otherwise standing by like a coward and watching as your people, white Christian Southerners, are slowly but certainly erased from the earth. The enemy intends to erase you and yours, and you will do nothing to oppose them. Don't you want to be free? How long will you waver between two opinions? Are you hesitant to throw off your chains, to throw off political correctness, to remove your allegiance to an evil empire? And of course, I'm speaking to these cameras, hopefully to reach some people, because I know probably most of you are already converted. Yet if there is a person hearing my voice who is hesitant to throw off its allegiance to the American empire, let me say I understand that hesitancy. I was once right where you are, and it is due to the emotional and psychological ties that you have developed for the beast on the Potomac and its flag. It is not easy to walk away from the devil's playground. But that's what the United States has become. The United States government is the devil's whore, demanding that sexually confused men, as my brother has said, be allowed to go to the bathroom with your little girl. Did you ever think that you would live to see such a thing? My friends, that's just the tip of the iceberg. That's not the end of the depravity, that's the beginning. Soon, I would say, they will be handing out abortion pills to your daughters in middle school. Mark my word. Soon, they will be trying to install an abortion clinic in every public high school. Oh, preacher, that could never happen. That's the same thing you said about the bathroom. But it's here. Now, one of the most potent weapons the empire has against us is the charge of traitor. You are a traitor to America if you become a Southern nationalist. This is a powerful charge because it's easily made, but it takes time, thought, and articulation to defend against it. You've got to know enough history to explain why the Southern nationalist is not a traitor. Indeed, it is those who hold fast to the tyrannical Marxist U.S. government, a government guilty of countless abuses of the Southern people, who is the actual traitor to their own against their own blood. It's bad enough to betray a political commitment, such as, say, an agreed-upon constitution, but to go as far as to turn one's back on one's own family and blood is the depths of betrayal. I appreciate Brother Mark's remarks about the Constitution, and especially his mention of Patrick Henry, the leader of the anti-Federalists. We march in the tracks of this man, Patrick Henry. The charge of traitor has a real bite, a real sting and stigma for the people with any sense of honor. That's why it works well as a weapon against Southerners. We instinctively have a sense of honor. It's in our blood. The enemy knows this and will play upon our people's misplaced loyalty. By the way, have you ever noticed that the charge of traitor is never used in the hood? It has no bite there. You know why? Because there's no sense of honor there. In the hood, there's no sense of honor to play against. And the charge of traitor only works where there is a palpable sense of honor and a level of intelligence that can grasp such a concept as loyalty. But I believe a solid conversion to the Southern nationalist cause can be made when a person realizes that their God-mandated allegiance rightly rests in their own people, not in some alien, godless seat of power in D.C., and certainly not to the invading hordes who were not of our blood or of our racial family. I love my own people, my own blood kin, my own white Southern race, far and away above any affection that I would have for any other people, and that is the most natural thing there is. It is just as natural as breathing air into one's lung to love your family. More love for my own doesn't equal hate for anyone else. I love my 5 grandchildren more than I love your grandchildren. And you love your grandchildren more than you would love mine. That is the most natural thing in the world. Because I love mine doesn't mean that I hate yours. What kind of moral freak would I be if I didn't love my own the most and the best? Now, I want to talk a moment about the other obstacles to achieving an inner independence. And I'm going to I'll be grinding a few of my own axes, if you will. There's the prop comes in handy again. I want to talk about false theological escapism. This is a great obstacle to winning our people. A pastor friend of mine once made me a promise. He said, Jesus is coming back soon. And that was in 1983, well over 30 years ago. Not once in all of the years between then and now has he ever looked me up and apologized for misleading me about the second coming of Christ. I was in high school then. I believed him. I believed that he knew what he was talking about. He claimed to have certain knowledge of Christ's soon return in or around 1983. But he was badly mistaken. He was wrong. This false eschatology or end times doctrine that he followed is called dispensationalism. It is the poison doctrine followed by hucksters such as Tim LaHaye, author of the Left Behind series of books. They promise that a secret rapture is about to take place and that the situation for God's people must inevitably get worse and worse to prepare for the secret rapture event. Now, if you accept that, don't you see how hopeless that is? That means that if you try to work for a better world for your children, you're actually working against the promises of God. We've got to reject this false eschatology. But the secret rapture that they promise doesn't occur. But these false prophets will not admit. They lie to you just to get your money. And they are making millions off of their books and movies. No, they keep your money and write yet another book promising yet another rapture event that must take place soon. The awful tragedy of these false prophets is that they give God's people a rationale for doing nothing. Let me say that again. These false prophets who say, let's just enjoy what time we have left. It's just all going to keep getting worse and worse. The Lord's coming back and He's just going to take care of all of that. Don't try to get me involved in any Southern nationalist movement. I'm just going to try to live out what little time I have left. The actual tragedy, I say again, of these false prophets is that they give God's people a rationale for doing absolutely nothing. And that is a terrible hopelessness which our people seem to be largely encased in. No action taken toward building a future for the next generation. A friend and I were talking the other day about how bad things are morally and politically and financially in this country. I said to him, come join us in the League of the South as we work for a brighter future for our children. But he replied, no, it's hopeless. It's hopeless. It can't get any better. All we can do is wait for the rapture or wait for the rescue. And I replied, man, stop using the rapture or your end-time theology as an excuse for your cowardice. Stop using the rapture as an excuse for your laziness. God does not want you to sit around in despair waiting for some secret rapture. By the way, the Bible doesn't even teach that there's going to be one, but we don't have time to get into all that. But what does God expect? He expects you to get up and get busy building the kingdom of Christ. But you will never be a kingdom builder as long as you are stuck in the godless American empire. Come out from among them and be ye separate. Throw off the false demonic doctrines, dispensationalism, the false eschatology. These things have paralyzed God's people with hopelessness of false escapism, which serves only to remove from us a sense of responsibility to build a future for our children and for our grandchildren. And we do that by rebuilding Christendom in the Southland. But we will never do it until we drive out these false prophets and drive out those who oppose us with their wicked policies and drive into the sea the parasites who feed their own greed at our expense. Not only must we throw off and reject this false and cowardly escapism, but we must also reclaim our manhood from the feminizing influences that have turned our men into little compliant, weepy, metrosexual wimps. Is there anything more offensive to the sovereign Christ than a girly man? What has happened to the bastion of Southern manhood, which was once the very envy of the West, the very standard of manliness and masculinity, looked upon with admiration by the whole civilized world? I tell you, I believe that at least two institutions are to blame for feminizing our boys and young men. The first is the public schools. From the time a boy is put in school, he sees nothing but women in places of authority. He sees very few strong male role models. Boys are made to do the very things that they hate. That is to sit down, be quiet, be still, be compliant, be tame, never give vent to their natural masculine wildness that God builds into a boy. In short, the schools are mentally, emotionally, and physically emasculating and castrating our young men. Our boys and young men are crying out for someone to rescue them from that which suffocates their very masculinity. And we wonder why some of these young men decide that they want to put on dresses and be girls. We must either change the schools or else get our boys out of these feminist factories. Boys don't need to sit quietly for 7 hours a day. Boys need to be wild. They need to fight. They need to wrestle. They need to struggle. They need to learn self-discipline and self-control. Yes, they need to learn respect, but even more, they need to learn to take the fight to the enemy, because their enemies are closing in on them more every day, and they don't even know it. What does a white Southern boy learn to think of himself in school? That he should feel eternal guilt and shame for how his forefathers treated other races of men. That is a lie. They shouldn't feel any guilt or any shame over their forefathers. On the contrary, they should take great pride in men like George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Patrick Henry, James Oglethorpe, Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, Andrew Jackson. They're fixing to erase, of course, off the money. These European Southerners that I've just mentioned were some of the greatest men to ever draw breath. They built civilization when nobody else could or would. They ripped it and carved it from the wilderness with their own hands. Yes, they all used slave labor, big deal. That was how you got things done in those days. If you don't want to be a slave, get a job and prove you're better than a slave. And for God's sake, don't brag or boast that your forebears were held in slavery. That's nothing to brag about. That's nothing to be proud of. Not only do the schools feminize the young men, but the churches do so as well. Now, I come from a Baptist or evangelical background. Not all of you do. And not all of you may even be Christians. I understand that. We don't have a religious test in the league. I understand that, but you know where I'm coming from. In the churches, a boy has to sit in class, in school, a boy has to sit in class and be still and be quiet Monday through Friday, and then on Sunday you stick him back in a class called Sunday school, and he has to endure it on the weekend as well. Is it any wonder our young men hate going to church? Is it any mystery that as soon as they can, they leave the church and most often never return? Church is now seen as a club for women, children, old men, and feminine men who are dominated by their wives. Real men, masculine men, for the most part, avoid church because it's a feminist institution that sings little girly songs and has girly men in the pulpit and is generally the most boring hour of the week. Women run almost every evangelical church in the South, and I say that as an evangelical pastor. We must have a radical masculine reformation of the church, or it will soon disappear, or else they'll just paint all the churches pink. In the past couple of years, the issue of feminizing the church has really come to a head for me. And I'll name some names and mention 3 examples that have just made my stomach turn and have made me very angry. I mention these not so much in mocking these people as to using them as examples of what we must not become. One is Pastor David Blackburn of Indiana. He left the house one morning early. His pregnant wife Amanda and another small child he left in his home. As soon as he left, a gang of black thugs invaded the home. His pregnant wife Amanda, was raped and murdered. I know all of you heard about this. How would you react to that? Well, none of us really know how we will react to anything until we're there. But instead of showing outrage, Pastor Blackburn, in a day or two, had come on television to issue an immediate statement of complete forgiveness for these thugs who had raped and murdered his wife and unborn child, even though the thugs had certainly not asked for any forgiveness. Now, I know it sounds cruel to say in today's politically correct climate, but I cannot see this Pastor Blackburn as a man. No man would react to the rape and murder of his pregnant wife and unborn child. I'm sorry. He's not a man. Not by any sane Christian definition of manhood. No real man of old Christendom would ever have responded in such a feminine way to the rape and murder of their wife and unborn child. Ecclesiastes says there is a time to kill. What if Charles Martel, the Hammer, would have been a Pastor David Blackburn kind of Christian? Europe would already be overrun and be a Muslim continent, as it looks like it's soon going to be. Well, what should have Pastor Blackburn have done? I know it's easy to sit back and make judgment, but we have to ask the question. I believe that if it happened to me, this is what I would do. First of all, from the very moment that I heard the news, I would count myself as dead with my wife. I would count myself as having died with her. And that would free me up to do some necessary things. I would declare a holy war on the one that raped and murdered my wife and child. They would have had no rest. A prison cell would not have guarded them from me. Neither they nor their families would have been safe from me for the rest of their time here on earth. And now, if that sounds crazy to you, you sound crazy to me. When civilized behavior breaks down, don't be afraid to break down with it. Show your enemies that if you want to treat me and my family in a savage way, I'm willing to be just as savage as you are, and even more so. In fact, I want all my potential enemies always to know that I'm willing to be more dangerous than they can ever be. If we don't recapture the spirit of the Hammer Charles Martel, we as a white Christian civilization are doomed, and we deserve to be. But we don't have the spirit of Charles Martel. No, we have the spirit of John Piper. How many of you know Pastor Piper? This is the second of the examples I want to mention. John Piper is a leading evangelical theologian, author, and pastor. Piper has written a large stack of books. Some of them I have taught in church myself because he has done some very good work theologically, in my opinion. But one recent message by John Piper ruined his whole legacy for me. I have no use for him any longer. John Piper heard that Jerry Falwell Jr. had stood up at Liberty University and encouraged all the students to carry guns for protection. That sounds pretty sane to you and me. John Piper responded, citing Romans 13 about letting the government be your protector. Piper said that a Christian should never carry a weapon, and even if a thug attacks your wife, you should not necessarily defend your own wife. And that is Christian manhood? No, let me tell you what that is. That is the complete and utter denial of Christian manhood. John Piper, in saying such an outrageous thing, has essentially transitioned himself into a woman. Piper is now the Bruce Caitlyn Jenner of the evangelical world, in my opinion. Is it any wonder that these girly men pastors have also come out as welcoming with open arms the third world invasion of Europe and of the United States? By the way, John Piper is from South Carolina, but he's relocated to Minnesota. More comfortable up there with the Yankees. And he has also publicly denounced the Confederate battle flag. Surprise, surprise. By the way, the Southern Baptist Convention is poised very soon to do the same thing. A black pastor by the last name of McKissick, I believe it is, has authored a resolution denouncing the Confederate battle flag and has offered it to the Southern Baptist Convention. They'll consider it, and they'll most likely vote in favor of that resolution. I don't think I'm going to be asked to speak at the next Southern Baptist Convention. By the way, how am I doing on time, brother? We're about there?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. I want to mention one more example, and that is a man by the name of Russell Moore. Russell Moore was a professor at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky, but now is the president of the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission of the Southern Baptist Convention. His personal mission and declared mission is to make sure that no Southern Baptist church remains all white or racially homogeneous. His call to battle is never again a white church. Here's a man that's utterly devoured by white guilt and utterly consumed by political correctness. These men that I mentioned, these examples of the modern evangelical Christian manhood, they cannot hold civilization. Men like that cannot hold civilization. Men like that did not build Christian civilization, and they cannot hold it. They're not man enough. They're not willing to do the necessary things to maintain civilization against our enemies. Quickly, let me try to bring us to a close with some strategies for escaping a Mariolatry and its hopelessness. Number one, be ruthless with evil. Be ruthless with evil. Christ said, if thy hand offend thee, cut it off. It is better for you to enter into life maimed than having two hands to go into hell, into the fire that never shall be quenched. I believe that there is a place for winsomeness in the Southern Nationalist movement. We have to have the type of personality that has a winsome side. By that I mean that sometimes your personality needs to be as smooth as silk. Some of you have a personality that's kind of like sandpaper. It's kind of abrasive. Well, that's okay to have that side, but you need to have the other side as well. Because God can use you in different situations, in different ways. So we have to have that versatility. But make no mistake about it, you have to be ruthless with evil. Christ was, as he walked here on this earth, when he formed the whip and the cords and went into the temple and drove out his enemies violently, he proved it. And not only then, but time and time again. Our enemies will never give us permission to oppose them. Do you understand? We cannot hold out and beg our enemies for permission to oppose them. They will never give it. We've got to be ruthless with evil. Now that begins in my own life, in your own life. When you find inconsistencies in your own life, or I find it in my life, I've got to be ruthless. I've got to cut it out. I've got to cut it out. If I've got poor habits, undisciplined habits, Christ said the axe is laid to the root of the tree. Find it, lay the axe to the root of it, and get that inconsistency, that evil out of your own life. And I pledge to you, my brothers and sisters, to do the same thing in my life. With our enemies, as I said before, they need to understand that we are not people to be trifled with. We are people that are willing, as Brother Mark reminded me of, I believe it was The Godfather movie yesterday. We'll go to the mattresses with you. We'll do what's necessary. We are for a peaceful change for our people. We all know that. We've pledged that time and time again. We work by honorable means, not dishonorable. But all need to understand that we are real men, and our ladies that follow along with us. And we will not ask for permission from our enemies to make the changes that are necessary to secure a freedom and a future for our children, for our grandchildren, and the freedom to rebuild Christendom in these our own lands. It is time for Southerners to be Revelation 19 Southerners. Once again, Revelation 19:11. Now I saw heaven open, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat on him was called Faithful and True. And in the righteousness he judges and makes war. His eyes were like a flame of fire, and on his head were many crowns. He had a name written that no one knew except himself. He was clothed with a robe dipped in blood, and his name is called the Word of God. And the armies in heaven, clothed in fine linen, white and clean, followed him on white horses. Now out of his mouth goes a sharp sword, that with it he should strike the nation, and he himself will rule them with a rod of iron. He himself treads the winepress of the fierceness and wrath of Almighty God, and he has on his robe and on his thigh a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Be the men that God has called you to be, and bring your ladies and your families, your children, your grandchildren along with you into a bright future. Thank you. May God richly bless you.
Well, we've never had Mr. Davis as a speaker before in the Florida League of the South, but I think you just put yourself on the permanent speakers here. We can take a very short break here and hold a raffle. Each of you should have got a raffle ticket for a door prize when you first came in. I'm going to ask again, is there anybody here who does not have a raffle ticket? All right. No, we're just, it's a free one ticket as you come in the door. Our raffle today is based on what the Florida League of the South calls the Buy Southern program. Now, each of you in your packet had a flyer titled Buy Southern. The purpose of the Buy Southern program is to keep our money locally and in the South, rather than send it out to the rest of the American empire or foreign nations. Our flyer demonstrates how at one time the South was the richest part of this continent until war came. And using the state of Georgia as an example, it's my understanding the taxable assets of the state of Georgia did not reach their 1865 level after that war until 100 years later in 1960. That's how thoroughly devastated Georgia was from that imperial invasion. Since that time, the South has been the poorest part of the country. It has never fully recovered until only recently. We're starting to see a military, economic, and industrial swing from the north to the south. And the South is growing stronger every day. I believe that's the hand of God showing itself in our land. What we want to do as Southern Nationalists is to help that progress move right along with a Buy Southern program. What that entails is when you go to the store, search those shelves carefully for the state of origin for those products. The Buy Southern program flyer in your packet explains in detail, more so than what I'm going to cover here today. But suffice it to say, we need to buy local and we need to buy Southern to improve our own economy and bring us up in strength for the coming struggle. Now I have here 3 products which my dear wife has picked from the store, and they're all made in the South. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to pick a raffle ticket out of here and tell you a little bit about the product. And if anybody in this room can guess the city and state where this product originated, you can have it without the raffle ticket. The first product is Brianna's Homestyle Creamy Balsamic Dressing. Now, does anybody have any idea where this might come from? Anybody seen it before in the store? Probably never seen it. I'm going to tell you. Brenham, Texas. So the winner of Brianna's Homestyle Creamy Balsamic Dressing is Max Murphy. Congratulations, sir. Inside job. Our next product is Durkee, famous sandwich and salad sauce, since 1857, and it's made in the South. Did anybody ever seen this before? Really? Where's it from?
Mississippi. Mississippi.
No. 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 That's it. I'll go ahead and tell you. Memphis, Tennessee. And the winner of this Durkee famous sauce is Mark Tommy. Our last item on the raffle is Moore's Original Buffalo Wing Sauce. Anybody ever seen it on the store shelf before? My, we are not familiar with our Southern products, are we? Speaking of not being familiar. Oh, okay. And the winner, nobody knows? There's your chance. Birmingham, Alabama. And the winner is Laura Eddy. Now, folks, there's a reason that we don't know these products. As our flyer demonstrates, you walk into any store in the South, you'll find that the vast majority of the products at eye level are not from the South. That's premium sales space right there. And somebody else has bought it out. You'll find the Southern products either very high on the shelf or very low. There's a reason for that. This isn't our land. So I want you to take more time and study when you go to the store those products, where they're from, and start going through your cabinets, look at the sources of the items on your shelf. Where are they from? Who are you sending your money to? You sending it to New York, California, Israel, Ukraine, or are you buying from your southern neighbors in Alabama, Florida, and Texas? I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you will continue to buy Southern from here on out. Time for me to introduce our third and final speaker. Dr. James Michael Hill was born in 1951 in rural northern Alabama in Marion County, which was named after General Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox. He apprehended his first bad guy at gunpoint at the young age of 11. And I'm anxious to hear that story sometime. He played several sports in high school, won numerous awards, and received several athletic scholarship offers. Dr. Hill has been married for almost 42 years to the former Sarah Kate Dudlin of Selma, Alabama. They have 3 grown children and 4 grandchildren, with another one on the way. He earned a PhD in history from the University of Alabama in 1985 and taught history at that same university and at Stillman College from 1979 to 1999. And president of the League of the South from 1994 to the present. He has authored 2 books and numerous articles on Celtic and military history. Dr. Hill is an avid hunter, hiker, and shooter, and enjoys working out, camping, canoeing, traveling, writing songs, and playing music, gardening, reading, and Bible study. He considers himself a traditionalist Christian, but without an organized church at the moment. Dr. Hill spent some time abroad in the world doing various things early in life that he has been very tight-lipped about to this day. And someday, again, I hope to pry some stories out of him. His most prized autograph is from Colonel Jeff Cooper, the father of modern pistol shooting. His most prized conversation, 2 hours with Dwayne Allman in July of 1970. Please welcome the President of the League of the South, Dr. J. Michael Hill.
Thank you, Mike, for that introduction. Mike told me to write a few things out because I normally just say, well, I was born here and got this many kids, married. He said, all right, give me some more stuff. So I'm kind of a little self-conscious about some of that. So, but I'll tell you what, I really did enjoy Tom Davis's problem.
Feel free to use that.
Fine. Oh, okay. There are plenty of people that need to be used out, not in this room. I really enjoyed our 2 previous speakers. It's always hard to follow good speakers like that. It's always a privilege to do so. But as I was saying to them last night, it's always good to say, as Mark Tommy said, or as Pastor Davis said, you know, so you can kind of fall back on some things that they said that you enjoy hearing. Thank goodness that this doesn't apply to Tom or any of the other pastors in the league. But, you know, we've been told lately that we've got X number of genders now. I mean, it's probably more today than yesterday and probably fewer today than there will be tomorrow. But, you know, we've got all these genders. Well, I heard a joke many, many years ago, back when we only had 3 genders. Male, female, and clergy. Well, Tom doesn't. That doesn't apply to Tom. I'll tell you that. But yeah, that's a subject that Tom ended on today that is very close to the surface for me all the time about how the church has betrayed Christendom. And I think I just wrote an article that touched on part of that in the latest issue of the Free Magnolia, and I expanded on it, put it on our league website, leagueofthesouth.com. But I grew up as a, well, I didn't grow up, but for the last 20-something years, I've been a Presbyterian. I'm Scots, and that came very natural to me. And over that 20-plus year period, I've seen the church, the Southern Presbyterian Church, called the PCA, Presbyterian Church in America, which is the old Southern Presbyterian Church, start down the wide avenue to hell. And boy, they're going as fast as they can go. Tom mentioned what the Southern Baptist Convention is about to do this summer, or this month, at General Assembly. the PCA is about to do something even as egregious or more so, and that is they are going to get down on their knees and beg for forgiveness for not having supported the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s as they should have. And that's one of the reasons that my wife and I recently left our church. And in the introduction, Mike said that I was a traditional Christian, but at present didn't have an organized church. Well, that's the reason why my wife and I refused to go to the church that we didn't consider doing that. And they're going to do it. And I asked my pastor in my session, mayor, and elders, last year when this first came up, what their position was on it, and they never would give me an answer. And finally, just deduced by putting two and two together what the answer was. I just was not going to waste my time at a place like that called itself a church anymore. You know, a lot of places call themselves churches today that are not churches. And I have a lot of friends who are in the same boat I'm in. They're Christians, but they refuse to go worship in such a den of iniquity. And I have a lot of some friends who are not Christians, and they say, well, this is why we're not Christian. Well, I always tell them, look, please don't judge our God by what his false followers happen to be doing on this earth. Because as Tom pointed out, and as Mike mentioned earlier too, traditional Christianity is not what you're seeing from 90% of the organizations that call themselves churches today. Old, manly, muscular Christianity is a thing that the modern world detests and runs from. But that's what we support and believe. So, but I want to talk to you today about why the League, in general, and Southern nationalism both, are the answers to these problems that our two initial speakers have brought up. I mentioned something the other day on our League Facebook page about you've got Southerners that go through all these phases. They'll join the Republican Party. They'll get disgusted with that, and they'll join the Tea Party or the Libertarian Party or the Constitution Party or something else. And eventually they just become frustrated and don't know what to do. Well, that's where we come in. We are the last step for people who are able to discern what needs to be done. And over the last 22 years, since we formed the League in 1994, I've seen a lot of people go through those phases and come to the League. Some have stayed and some have not. But I don't really see, after having given it a lot of thought, any other options. Because I wrote an article, actually, gave a speech, and then wrote the article, which is normally not the way you do things. My wife always fussed at me about that because I'd often go to a speaking engagement with no speech. And she said, why do you not take a speech to a speaking engagement? I said, because I want to do at the podium the equivalent of what Dwayne Allman used to do on stage, and that is improvise. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Now, to be serious about that, it eventually did start to work. And some of the best speeches I've ever given, I had no notes at all in front of me, and it just came out. But you can't really rely on that all the time. But this is one of those instances where I had been asked by the Georgia League to come up, of all places, Macon, and give a speech, and I had no idea what I was going to talk about. I just was going to, as it were, let the Spirit move me, you know. And it turned out I gave one of the best speeches I've ever given, and then I wrote the article when I got home. But it was called "When Politics Fail." And I think I maybe published that in an earlier edition of the Free Magnolia. But that's a theme that's run through pretty much every speech that I've given since then. And that is, if you depend on politics as we define them in America, in this democratic system that we have, to be your temporal salvation, you're going to be disappointed, first and foremost, because of what Mark pointed out. As Mark said earlier, that we're always going to be outvoted because we don't have the numbers. We're a minority within this political entity known as the American Empire, and we will not vote ourselves out of anything. Mark that down in your notes. We will not vote ourselves out of anything. And you're not going to vote for Donald Trump and get out of anything. Now, I'm glad he came along because he's sort of giving voice to a lot of frustrations out there that need to be voiced. But also, it's bringing about the requisite chaos in the American political system that we need. I was on the way down yesterday and I heard on the radio news that there had been some attacks at a Trump rally in California by a bunch of Mexicans waving Mexican flags against, and somebody just came out and said, white people, you know, white people were attacked. Well, you don't hear that on the radio very much. So this is going to get nothing but worse, better for us, but worse probably in the eyes of most people. As we go from the primaries, and I think the last primary is this coming Tuesday, and then it shifts into the conventions and then the general election. And the general election campaign this year promises to be tumultuous, if nothing else. And I'm just, you know, chomping at the bit to watch what happens and see what kind of hay that we can make out of it, because it really is going to be interesting to watch. Look, even if Mr. Trump, who says some of the right things about immigration and stuff like that, I can't tell you the number of interviews that I've done with the domestic media and the foreign media since last summer about Donald Trump and whether or not the league was going to endorse him. I said, look, we don't endorse people for president. We're trying to get out of this godforsaken place. Why don't we care who the president is, other than, you know, having someone that would just destroy the office, whatever. But, you know, you have to take advantage of the situations that God puts out there for you. And this is one, I think, that is there for us to take advantage of. And obviously, there are certain tactics that you can apply to make the situation even worse, but they're not the kind of things you get up in front of people and talk about. There are a lot of things that you talk about face to face with people, and you don't spread out, you know, all over the world. But, you know, I think that there's been a concerted effort by the likes of George Soros and various others to throw this element of chaos into the American political system. For whatever reason, I'm sure that they have a different objective in doing it than we would for them. But nonetheless, chaos is about all we can expect to get out of politics. That's about the most positive thing we can expect to get out of it. Now, when I say politics, I don't mean on the very local level or even the state level. We still have some things that we can do on those levels that could make a difference, but I'm not going to go into those today. And I'm talking about national politics. Forget it, except for the chaos factor. okay? And I'll tell you why or what we need to start trying to emphasize in place of this fetish that Americans have for democratic politics. And when I say democratic, I don't mean it has anything to do with the Democratic Party. This has to do with the democratic process of majority voters. You know, this article that article that I did about the politics fail, asked the inevitable question. When you've done everything you can do politically through this democratic system that has been imposed upon us, Southerners have never been very supportive of the system, even though we go out and vote and stuff like that, because the American system of democracy is based on the idea of equality, and Southerners, whether they realize it or not, have always abhorred equality, and a good Southerner always will. What happens if you cannot defend your life, your property, your freedom through the democratic process, no matter how hard you try? I mean, you voted hard. You know, you worked for a candidate. Your candidate lost. And the candidates who won on a platform of disappropriating or disenfranchising you and appropriating your wealth against your will. I've had people say, well, you just have to live with this decision of the voters. You live in a democracy, the voters vote, you lose, you suffer the consequences. My response to that is not, no, hell no. I'm not living by the results of an election whereby the winners are going to rob me blind, perhaps kill my family or rape my wife and the children, or create the circumstances that will allow that to happen. No, I'll go to war first. I'll shoot the bastards first. I'm not going to abide by the results of any democratic election that promised me nothing but misery in the future. Only a fool or an effeminate man would do that. So I've had, I went on, how many of you know who Alan Combs is? And some of you have heard this before, so pardon me. But I went on this radio show on WABC in New York back in the 90s, 95, 96, 20 years ago. And he said, so what you're saying is that you Southerners will actually fight and kill to defend your rights and your property and all. I said, well, yeah, we will. I said, and it, by the way, tells a lot about you, sir, that you even have to ask that question. This is what men do, sir. You are not a man. This is what men have always done. And this is what we Southern men will do if you put us in that position. So I don't mind telling the world that if you try to put the boot of tyranny on us, we're not going to sit still for it. We're going to fight you with everything that we have by every means possible, above ground and below ground, as it were. And we'll do what we have to do. That's just all there is to it. So that was basically the gist of my article, When Politics Fail, that a man does what he has to do, and it usually involves picking up some sort of big weapon like this and wielding it ceaselessly